So you may be wondering how the value of a currency goes up or down over time. So in this video, we're going to take a look at that. So the value of currencies could be evaluated graphically, but we could just understand it from a common sense perspective. The idea is that if you want to buy foreign currency, if you want to get another country's currency, you have to offer your own. So in graphical analysis, I often say that the demand for, let's say, US dollars by a Canadian is the same as the supply of Canadian dollars for those US dollars, because you don't have a choice but to supply Canadian to get US. Here I'm not saying the same in value, but it's just there needs to be a supply of Canadian dollars to get those US dollars. And then you could also say that there's a certain demand for US dollars, but there could also be a demand for Canadian dollars by foreigners. Let's just stay in this two-country framework like I just explained, and say that those foreigners, the Americans who want Canadian dollars, are supplying their own US dollar. So you could see this with two separate graphs and two separate curves. And with those two curves, you could establish the equilibrium exchange rate. But let's just understand, in essence, how all of this works. So as you want to buy more of a foreign currency, you're creating a desire for that currency. Therefore, there's demand for it. And as demand increases for something, it brings up its value. Same as just about anything. If a lot of people want to buy the same house, it's going to bring up the value of the house. If a house has been on the market for a long time, no one wants to buy it, the value is going to start dropping. Same kind of idea that applies here. So as a lot of people want to buy, let's say, US dollars, they're going to be supplying Canadian to do so. And that's going to bring up the value of the US dollar relative to the Canadian, because as more and more people want to get those US dollars that are available, they're going to have to supply more and more Canadian dollars to obtain that, because the value of that US currency is going to go up. So as you demand another country's currency, you're bringing up its value relative to your own, and you're lowering your own relative to theirs. It's the same thing, because there's more of that domestic currency, your Canadian currency, in those exchange rate markets. So now that we understand like what drives prices up or down, values of currency up or down, well, what are the different things that can make you want to buy US currency? So yes, there's speculation, which could just be the buy and sell currency based on your expectations of its value going up or down. But if we set that aside, the rest of the reasons why a currency goes up in value or goes up in demand is based on people wanting that currency to make a purchase. So it could either be, I want US dollars to be able to buy a good made in the US by a company that's charging its price in US dollars. So for me as a Canadian to buy that product, I need to get US dollars first. I could be traveling in that country, and that's therefore I'll be using a lot of their currency to make various purchases. And then it could also be that I want to buy some of their financial assets, some of their stocks, bonds, treasury bills. Therefore, I need that foreign currency to be able to make that purchase. So as more countries want another country's currency, it brings up the value of that currency. So let's just think of different examples that could do that. Let's say Canada were to invent this pharmaceutical drug that instantaneously cures cancer. Obviously, if this were to happen, a lot of people around the globe would want to get access to that miracle drug. And if that were to happen, well, then you'd have a lot of countries asking to buy that product, which is selling in Canadian dollars. Therefore, a lot of people are asking in the exchange rate markets for Canadian dollars, offering their own currency in exchange. That's going to bring up the value of the Canadian currency, as a lot of people want that currency to make that purchase. Same thing can happen in other circumstances. Just think about it as the quantity of Canadian dollars that other people need. So another one that might not be as obvious is historically there's been situations where the price of oil goes up or down, a barrel of oil. And obviously when the price of something goes up, it may lead to people buying less of it. And if people buy less of that good, well then they might need less currency, they might need more, depends on how much the price has gone up versus the drop in demand. But let's say the price goes up by 20%, but the drop in demand just drops like 2%, which is a very small drop to that high increase in price. In that situation, foreigners would need more Canadian dollars to get more of our Canadian oil in this process. So historically speaking, there's been instances where the price of the barrel of oil has gone up, and that has led to an appreciation of the Canadian dollar as more foreigners or more Americans wanted to buy that oil to later refine it and do other things with it. So you have this situation where if the price of a good goes up, it can lead to more of your own currency being desired. It could be the opposite as well. If all of a sudden price goes up by 5%, but there's a 50% drop in demand, they buy more in their own country all of a sudden. Well, in that situation, the value of our currency would drop. Then there's to buy financial instruments. So this is why we often see that if you have interest rates in Canada and the States, and then the Bank of Canada announces an increase in the bank rate, and the Americans don't, well, that increase in Canada will make our financial instruments more profitable. So there's going to be an inflow of money wanting to buy those financial instruments, and that's going to lead to an appreciation of the Canadian dollar. That's another reason why the Canadian dollar may appreciate. And then you also have to look at the flip side. So there's different things that want to make the Canadian dollar appreciate, and there's different things that make the foreign countries' currency appreciate. And then it's kind of like that combined effect that's going to mean whether it goes up or down in value. So if all of a sudden a lot more Americans are buying Canadian goods and Canadians are buying less American goods and buying more locally, we could expect the value of the Canadian currency to go up. If on the other hand, more Canadians are buying US made goods and more Americans are buying locally, not buying Canadian goods, we would expect their currency to go up, so ours to go down relative to theirs. And then same thing happens with monetary flows as well. So once you take into account all the reasons why you want another country's currency or they want yours and how that changes over time, it helps you understand why the value of the currency goes up or down over time. Okay? There's other reasons that may make you want to go away from a currency or go towards it, but those are the main reasons that you should understand. Hopefully that explains how monetary flows happen and how, as more foreigners want to get more Canadian currency in total, so here if price goes up and they don't drop demand that much, they need more Canadian currency, it leads to an appreciation in the Canadian dollar. That effect on its own would lead to an appreciation. And then what in regards to the bank rate, I've talked about in a separate video, if the bank rate changes and there was an expectation of it, you might not see that increase right away, but as soon as the exchange rate markets expect the Canadian bank rate to go up, that would lead to an increase in the Canadian dollar's value. So whether it happens on the day of the announcement or before when expectations are kind of coming into fruition, it would lead to the same effect of an increase in the value of the currency when we just consider that on its own and nothing else. So hopefully you can understand how these small little changes will have an influence on the value of a currency. Catch you guys on the next one. If you found this video interesting, please consider subscribing or joining my class where I guide you to apply and expand on the information found in these videos to real-life examples. Have a good day.